Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right of the week, and we're talking tight ends today as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 319. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with 12-year NFL veteran and a local guy from right here in Drexel Hill, right outside Philadelphia, and Anthony Becht, a former first-round pick at tight end who played for a handful of teams in the league and still does a lot of work around the game. And we're bringing Anthony on just to talk about specifically the tight end position. What are the qualities that make a good tight end in the NFL? How has the position changed over the course of the last decade plus? And we will, of course, talk about Florida tight end Kyle Pitts, one of the hottest names in this NFL draft. How high would Anthony take him in the draft? What has he seen from him? What kind of impact can he have in an NFL offense? We're going to hit it all right here at the top of the show. Before we get going, though, with Chalk Talk, just a couple of quick things to hit on. First up, I wanted to quick remind you guys just to head on over to our Apple Podcast page, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you've liked some of the episodes that we've aired recently over the last couple of weeks, go on, let me know. If you've got an idea that you want something heard, if you have a question, go on, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Leave the question in the comment box, and we will hit on it. If you've got something from this past season that you want Ben and I to study in Scouting Report, that is the place to go. So really appreciate everybody that has continued to give us your support over on the Apple Podcast page and on Stitcher, really wherever you listen. Next up, I also want to give you guys a heads up. Look, we're getting closer and closer to the NFL draft. We're under 50 days away now at this point from draft weekend. So make sure you go and get up to speed over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We're starting to our transition this week to the offensive line. Who are the top blockers in this upcoming NFL draft? We know the Eagles had a lot of young guys play up front this year due to injury, but if you're a fan that wants to see them add more competition to that room, I suggest you make sure and go subscribe to get this week's slate of episodes. Greg Cosell's going to pop by later this week as well to talk about some of his top players that he's studied on film. You don't want to miss any of this analysis. Be sure to go check that out over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, wherever podcasts can be found. All right, with all that out of the way, let's now get this show started. It's time to kick things off with Anthony Becht in Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, excited to welcome here to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, not only a 12-year NFL vet, but a Philly guy, and Anthony Becht. Anthony, thanks for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, no doubt. It's good to be on, talk a little ball. You know, the season ends, you get a couple weeks off, and then all of a sudden you're knees deep in the draft and some of these college players for teams and free agency. So it's year round, it's exciting, and a lot of teams, to look forward to some of the decisions that they make moving forward.
Yeah, no question. And we will dive a little bit into that process. But I want to ask you this. When we're going to talk a lot about tight end play, and as I said, you played 12 years in the league, and I just want to know how it all started for you at the tight end position, because not everybody plays it all the way growing up. At what point did you make the change? What did you play beforehand, and what was kind of going through your mind when you were presented with the change to go move to tight end?
Yeah, so when I was going to school, playing in the Philadelphia Catholic League at Bonner High School. I was a tight end, but I split out a lot. I was 6'4.5" at the time, 185 pounds as a tight end. We actually had another receiver who was 6'4.5", 6'5" as well, 225 pounds. He should have probably been playing the tight end, but we would split out a ton, and we'd have some nice options for our quarterback there. So I tried to learn the position as best I could during that time. I wasn't a very good blocker in high school. None of those things. I wasn't in a weight room guy. I was just kind of a thin, frail, tall guy that could run a little bit, had good hands. And when I got to West Virginia, I had to put on a ton of weight. The number one thing that I had to learn was how to build my body up. I checked in at like 215 pounds the first day of training camp, which, again, wasn't very big and had to, kind of build myself up. But, I remember I would, the old adage was, to put mass on, you got to eat whatever. So I would eat me and my roommate, who was another kind of diamond in the rough guy. He was 6'8", like 240. So he was trying to put on weight too. He played defensive end. Okay. So we would get a pizza every night during the week. And we would split it every single night. There was a place across the street. It was like $4 for a pizza. And we just bang one out every single night. Ice cream, we'd eat extra meals over at the campus. And, finally, once that happened and I started to hit the weight room quite a bit and got into a regimen of lifting, my body started to change, got bigger, stronger. And ultimately, just from the fact of transitioning my body to build up into that position kind of started to formulate what I was going to be. I never had any aspirations of playing in the NFL when I went to college. It was just all about getting a scholarship, playing at a big school and, trying to, make the most of my career that way. And I thought that was kind of the end of the success. And then once I got to the end of my junior year, you start opening the Street and Smiths magazines and some of those publications, and all of a sudden, your name's like either one or two in the country as far as a position. So, I learned how to block a little more. I put the weight on, and then ultimately by my senior year, I came into the league. Now, coming into the league, the tight end position was a little different back in, not too long ago in 2000 was, a lot of teams the complete tight end. I'll be quite honest with you. It's the same now as it was then, but it's just the way they use them is much different. We'll probably get into that a little bit later. But, when I came in, I thought that I was going to be, I was a complete guy. I could run routes. I could catch. There was mismatch problems. And then I could block. I was a very good blocker in college. But when I came to the league, that was kind of like my Achilles heel. I mean, you're talking about grown men, a lot more defensive ends. You didn't get a lot of the 3-4 defenses early on, at least when I played. I think the Patriots were really the only team that were doing it. After that, I was just blocking defensive ends all the time. That was a huge challenge for me. And it took me about 2.5, 3 years to make that transition, get coached up properly, and then kind of build myself and morph myself into, a tight end that ultimately could play 12 seasons in the NFL.
What was the hardest part of when you were making that transition to, be a full, 3-down tight end? What was the toughest part for you? Was it the route running aspect? Was it the blocking? What was the toughest part for you in college?
You really got to work it. I mean, I didn't come in naturally gifted. I was a first-round draft pick. I did a lot of things good, but I didn't really have anything in my repertoire that was great. So I was an overachiever, someone that was accountable, smart, and, you just knew where he was going to be. He did what you asked, and you were good enough to be a mismatch problem, from a passing game and develop yourself, hopefully moving forward in the blocking side of it. I think for me, it just comes down to, an attitude. I think there's a lot of players in the league that we see at tight ends that, he can't block. He's a pass. That was the same thing that they were saying about me, when I came into the league. There were coaches, I heard them, he can't block. He can't do it. I mean, those things propel you and push you to know that's an important part of being a dominant tight end. Like you said, staying on the field for all 3 downs. I didn't want to come off the field. I didn't want him to have a receiver come in when we needed yards in the passing game. And I didn't want him to put a tackle in to block as well on the important down and distances. So I wanted to be in the game every single down. So it's just, the technique and just having a mindset of just changing your attitude, just wanting to be more physical, wanting to be more an attacking player. I think everybody's got it in them. It's just you got to find it in a lot of these guys that come out. They're not asked to do those things now. So you got to find it, dig deep, and let them know that's a big part of it. And really, that's what extended my career. If I was just catching balls and running routes, I wouldn't have lasted as long as I did. I had to add another feature to my game and to make myself, more, kind of needed throughout my NFL time. And I think from a route running standpoint, I remember when I came into the league, it was so funny. I mean, I had decent speed. I was, I knew all the routes, ran the route tree pretty good. But, I remember the first couple preseason games when I was out there running routes, man, like there were so many people just crossing my eyes in my face. Everything was so fast. I just couldn't slow the game down. And it took a while. It really did because, these guys, grown men with tremendous amount of speed, intellect, knowledge, and you're coming in, really don't know anything, and you're trying to fit yourself in. So I give a lot of credit to the guys that come in and actually are game changers their rookie year. It really is tough to do. Even if you're a high round draft pick, top 5, top 10 guy. I mean, this league's got a ton of great players, and for you to just jump in there, and if you're good enough to be successful, that's an impressive feat for any rookie.
I feel like that's like an undersold part of it is that, people talk about the jump in play speed from college to the NFL all the time. But when you play close to the ball and you're playing, between the hash marks, I mean, you have multiple guys that are moving at much higher speeds.
Yeah.
It's not just, I'm lined up outside the numbers and this guy runs 4.3. Yeah, that's a part of it. But it's like when you're dealing with all of the moving parts that go along with playing between the numbers, that's a tough feat.
Yeah, you got to get a feel for the playing field. When you're coming off the line, a lot of times in my pass routes, my eyes always went to the safety. Where are the safeties? That kind of dictated a lot. But if you're just locked into the safety and you run off the line of scrimmage, all of a sudden, Ray Lewis is coming across towards you, covering you, knocking you on your butt, or Bill Romanowski is trailing you on an underneath shallow route, and all of a sudden you sit in space and he's right there and he smashes you to the ground. So those unexpected things, right? So also learning how to study the game, film wise, that took time. I mean, to just jump in and just assume you know how to do all these things, even when you're as high drafted as I was coming out, there's just a lot more work that needs to be done. Some guys understand that, they grasp onto that, and they dig deep in it. And some guys just try to continue to maintain and go off the talent that got them to that level. But, that's surely not enough. And you see those guys that flake out every single season that get drafted high. It's much more to do with the work that they put in once they get there than the skill set or the failure for them to not live up to expectations athletically or, talent wise on the football field.
What were some of the points in your career where, you mentioned earlier, kind of like hearing the noise about what coaches would say about you as a blocker. Did you have certain points or breaking points in your career where you're like, all right, like this is where, this light went on, or where I kind of made this jump? What were those points and how did you kind of get to that point?
For me, it was very early on because, I was drafted by Bill Parcells and Al Groh was the head coach at the time. Yep. And that whole crew left after year one. Yep. So here comes Herm Edwards, the new head coach, and then Terry Bradway, who's kind of a local Philly guy, South Jersey guy, who was a longtime GM. And no, look, sat in their office and they pledged the dream. They told me that they're going to utilize me like, they came from Kansas City. So, we got, the offense like Tony Gonzalez, and we're going to get you the ball, and all this stuff was exciting. And then, a year later, they go and draft another tight end. So, now you're always trying, the old adage, they're always trying to replace you, right? So that kind of early on gave me kind of the wiring that I needed to understand that every year I came into training camp, regardless of what the deal was or where I was drafted, someone was always trying to take my position. And that kind of pushes you as a player. If it doesn't, you'll get replaced and someone will come in and take your spot. And, that's the one thing, when I was there, they drafted that guy. He was there for 3 seasons, my last 3 years. He never took my spot until I left. That was something. And then I went in to the next team with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and, came in my first year. John Gruden brought me in. And again, same situation. They drafted a tight end that first year, really good tight end out of Stanford, Alex Smith. And we worked together, but over those 3 seasons in Tampa was never able to be the starter, but we worked in complementary to each other. And I helped him, to grow and develop himself as a player. So, you can still be competitive. You can still, have that juice and fire at your position to be great and continue, but you got to have something that drives you. That's probably the biggest thing that drove me early on, because the fact that I experienced that early, a lot of guys don't experience that to maybe later in their career because either they're getting older, like, oh, here's the guy that replaced you. But when you happens, your third year in the league and you're a first round pick and there's new coaches and GMs, you start to worry about those things, and you can either fold and crash, or you take it to the next level, excel, and take on the competition. It only makes you better as a player. And that truly was another element of why it helped me play for 12 seasons in the NFL.
Who were the guys during your career that were the toughest matchups for you in terms of, trying to deal with them from a defensive standpoint?
Yeah. So number one, and I tell this to everybody, and a lot of people don't really embrace what he did. And, he did a lot of great things. I think he's the all-time leading sacker in Super Bowl history in Super Bowl games. But Willie McGinnis, the stand-up defensive end for the New England Patriots, was, to me, when I was playing, he was the dominant force on the outside. I just felt like, he was one of the guys that I truly had problems with blocking. I couldn't get my hands into him. He had long arms. He was big. He could run. He could get to the quarterback. He was a matchup problem for me. And I was a bigger tight end, someone that should be able to handle that. But technician-wise, he was able to put it all together. There's a lot of guys that are big and strong, but they don't have the know how to use their hands. Or there's guys that are, not as big and not as strong, but they counter because they have great hands and they can do other things, or they got speed. So he was kind of my nemesis for a long time. It really took me till I went to the Buccaneers, and he was on the back end of his career in Cleveland, where I finally dominated him in a game. But it didn't matter because Cleveland stunk and we beat him, and he didn't care. He's like, hey man, I'm just getting it was like his third contract at the time. And, we kind of chuckled after the game, but I'm like, man, I finally got you, Willie. He's like, hell man, it took you long enough. I'm like, heck, I'm on the back end of my career. But he's one of the guys. Jason Taylor was a premier outside stand-up defensive end pass rusher. Again, another guy, just tremendous usage of long arms. Wasn't the biggest cat from a thickness standpoint, but just had a great ability to just, you weren't able to get into him. And he was just a tremendous problem for tackles, let alone tight ends. So that was a huge mismatch. And another guy that was more of a battle because, he's just a bigger defensive end. We didn't play during the season every year, but always in preseason. Michael Strahan for the Giants. He's a guy that you line it up right over the tight end's head. He was going to try to come right through you, and if you didn't man up and bring force to it, then you're ultimately going to get smashed. And he didn't think very highly of tight ends. And one thing getting to know Michael when I was playing in New York, one of the greatest compliments that I had gotten from a defensive end is during that time later in our career, you always said, man, you're always the toughest tight end I ever had to go against because you're the guy that took it to me, took the punch, took the battles, and they didn't want to deal with that. And those are the things. Those are the kind of respects and the kind of words you want to hear from guys. But those are three players that I remember that stood out that just to my day, I forget a lot about football, but I remember those matchups versus those three guys, and they were definitely they were heated battles for many years.
So I was interested to see who you would bring up and the kinds of players you would bring up. And you brought up, big physical kind of pass rushers, outside players. And I feel like if you ask a lot of tight ends now, those answers might be a little bit different. That's why I wanted to ask you and just kind of transition to kind of the evolution of the position in your mind. Your rookie year in 2000, there were more fullbacks in the league that had 70 catches in the season than tight ends. Tony Gonzalez was the only guy. But then you get to your final year in 2011, there were 7 of those guys that had 70 plus catches. And you kind of see what the position has turned into now with all of these kind of hybrid players. In your mind, what has led this change at the position? And was there kind of a turning point? Was there a specific player or a couple players that kind of turned the tide and kind of turned it into what it is now?
I think the evolution of the quarterback has changed offenses across the NFL. You see now NFL offenses are more catered to the style of players in college that, are kind of the showcase quarterbacks that maybe in the past weren't necessarily going to be the ideal draft picks for teams, the Bakers and the Kyler Murrays and the Lamar Jacksons. So, you're starting to see now that with that, you're looking for a little more athletic tight end that's a little more gifted in the passing game, where he becomes much more of a matchup versus safeties, linebackers. He can be split out. The blocking aspect is wanted and it's needed, but it's not begged upon. They're not asking them to go out there and block these guys all, 65 plays of the game. Get in front of the guy. Be a nuisance to them. They're not asking them to go drive them down and create holes. They got linemen to do that. So again, that's how the game's changed. And you want tight ends that are a little more fluent in the route running game. Can they get away from the garbage in the middle up through the second level? Can they do it with speed? Can they track the ball like a receiver? Can they leap and jump and do all these things? A lot of those things I had, but it wasn't great at any of those things. It was just a complete buildup to get what you wanted. So a lot of those tight ends, you look at a guy like, I think the most complete tight end in the NFL, and he's the best blocker too. I'd say this: he's the best blocking tight end that can give you a little bit of the pass game is Nick Boyle from the Ravens. Now he's been he was hurt last year. But, he's a guy that kind of old school, reminded me of myself. I actually trained him a little bit when he came out of Delaware. So I got to see him and I immediately just took a liking to him because he is a complete guy. Now they have other tight ends that they throw to and utilize in that offense, but he's an important part of it that they missed dearly in the playoffs. A guy like Gronk, he does everything well, man. He loves the block. He did a ton of it this year and he still got it. He still catches, but he was a mismatch problem. Didn't beat you with a lot of speed, but he was able to just muscle you, get in position to catch the ball. If it was in his area, he was able to pluck it. And you were never able to kind of get over or through him. He was just such a big, strong weapon. And then once he did catch the ball and got in the open field, he did have enough speed to keep the distance he needed. And then you go to a guy like, in between me and those guys like a Jason Witten. Jason Witten, to me, a 3rd-round draft pick out of Tennessee. Nobody expected him to do much at all in the NFL level. But the thing about him is, Bill Parcells coached him, I believe, in Dallas, is that they fed him the ball early on. And they made him believe that he was going to be a guy that could win. He never had tremendous speed, but he always seems to be open. He always finds that spot. And he became really a craftsman at running routes. And then, you got all the way now where you got a Kelsey or a Darren Waller who just immediately is a matchup problem. These guys run routes as good as anybody. They're excellent in yards after the catch. And just, again, I think that's what you're looking for. That you don't ask them to block too much. If they have to, they will. But if you can start running these guys through the second, third level, there's nobody that can stop them. They really are unstoppable. So, again, you're starting to see that. You see one coming out of the draft this year as well. And teams are going to be high on that, man. That's the ideal kind of receiving tight end that guys want. And if they can bring a little nastiness and attitude, that's a bonus.
That's what I wanted to ask you about that player. That's Kyle Pitts out of the University of Florida. And kind of a guy after your own heart. The Philly transplant that ends up down in Florida. Pitts is, just a freak of nature athletically. What he does from a skill set standpoint. I'm interested to kind of get what you've seen from him and how you feel he could project based off what you've seen.
He's a monster now. He's a monster matchup problem versus really any NFL defense. He's not the biggest tight end as far as weight wise. I think he has some room to grow there. But, just watching him, to me, the one thing people see him as a route runner, he is actually extremely well versed in blocking. He shoots his hands inside very well. He sinks his hips. He is an attacking tight end, so he goes at the defensive ends. I really like the way he has the mold and attitude to be a guy. Now, once he gets on him and fights him, which he will do, eventually his lack of weight and size kind of gets at him. But, a lot of the problems with tight ends coming out that run a lot of routes and, they're more receiver is just they don't want to attack. He's got a little dog in him, which is nice to see. So that's going to be a huge bonus for him, even though to me, he's never going to be asked to block because, when he runs routes, it's as good as it gets. This kid sinks his hips out of the routes, can whip in and out any angled coming out of his break as good as any receiver. I haven't seen any linebackers that can cover him, and I haven't seen any safeties that, have been able to be effective against him. And then you bring him out and split him out to the receiver end where he can run slants in that tight quarter area down in the red zone. And he's got good enough feet and quickness to beat you on a slant, a go, a fade. And of course, he's got extremely high athletic ability as far as vertical jump and being able to high point balls at that level. Pass pro, if he's asked to do that, the one thing about him is if he's not blocking a guy or he's in protection, he will look for work, meaning he's going to try to hit a guy in the ribs that the tackle's engaged with. He's going to try to bring some of that. So again, have that attitude, have a little bit of that dog is something that's important. One thing that I noticed on film, to be quite honest with you, as dominant as he was in the passing game, I felt like that Florida, for at least for himself, was really not as used as much. And that might be more on Kyle because Kyle is a guy, to me, he didn't look like, when he kind of knew he wasn't going to get the football, he kind of took off some routes and not in a negative way. I just feel like if he ran everything like he was going to be the guy, he may have caught 20 more balls during the season. You see him sometimes, he's so gifted that when he gets out there, he just kind of, the first 5 yards, he's always the first guy up through the first 5 yards of the route across the board. And then all of a sudden he starts like slowing down, or if he sees a defender in a spot where he's supposed to be, he probably assumes he's not getting the football. So the one thing I would say is, which is going to be something he can easily change, that's just more of a do thing, is just run every route like he's going to, win every single time. If he does that, I think that just takes him to another level because that's the kind of thing that, I don't think it's necessarily laziness. I just think that in his mind, he's not thinking about like every play he can be a dominant force or get the ball every time. And I think from a blocking standpoint, I compare him to a Randy McMichael, 6'3" guy, played at Georgia, Miami guy. He's got a little bit of that dog in him. He's that same kind of guy. He's just got that little bit of dog in him. So look, a lot of people will project him to go high. I would seriously think about taking him as high as possible just because he is a matchup problem. He is going to be a game changer for any offense. He's going to be one of the best friends of the quarterback for sure. So he fits in a lot of systems, across the board that, if you're using a tight end, he fits your system. So that's pretty much every offense out there. So he's going to be hard to pass up. Once they get through all the crap with the quarterbacks and who wants what and who wants this, ultimately, do you have a quarterback that, okay, you may not love him, but can he be that much better because of this kid on the field? I truly think he can raise the level of any quarterback play, in the NFL.
I think that, one of the big things from a usage standpoint that you see with tight ends all around the league is, lining him up outside as like the X receiver on the backside of trips and what that can do in terms of giving the quarterback some information pre-snap. And, everybody tries to do it, but I feel like having that guy that can win as the X receiver, that's the X factor. And I feel like with him, I mean, he's instantly one of those guys in the league.
Yeah, it works both ways. I mean, obviously within the field, you're not going to just let your corner hang out there by himself. So you're going to have to shift over a guy that normally you probably want to shift over, whether it's a backer inside or the safety slides over. Now, if you're in trips, like you said, think about, 3 seam routes opposed to go a crossing route. Who's going to be in those zones when you're dealing with this guy over here that pretty much is already won because of his size. And then when you get down into the red zone, the 10 within the 5-yard line, what? You're one-on-one by yourself. He can run a slant, like you said, that he'll, I just watched the film against, I want to say it was Ole Miss, where the first game of the year, he just sticks his foot in the ground and the corner was on him. He just basically runs right by him untouched for a touchdown from the 5-yard line. He can do that same thing and then return back outside, where if you're going to overplay it, then he's going to just stick his foot in the ground. And then, of course, you got the fade route, which I hate that. But when you're talking about a guy that's, 6'5" or whatever he is, that can go up and leap as good as he can, that's a problem for any defense for sure.
What do you feel is the most important athletic trait for tight end? I think you mentioned, like, when you watch Gronk, it's not like Gronk is just running by everybody. We just did a thing where we studied all of Travis Kelce's targets last year. He's not just running by everybody. What did you feel when you watch guys, or, from when you played, is the most important athletic trait?
So 2 things I think are really important to be, really dominating, understand it, is number one, your explosion off the line of scrimmage into your route. I really think it's such a problem when you can get off, and you don't have to be the fastest tight end to do this. When you get off the line of scrimmage, because you hear the snap count a little easier than, where the receivers are asked to watch the football, where you can get through into the second, third level of the defense as fast as you can. And then ultimately the next trait is your body control, or I like to call it fluency, if that's even a word, where you're coming out of your breaks and cuts and everything's in sync. Your hips and your body can all turn with the cutting of your feet, whether it's a speed cut or you're breaking it down and breaking in and out or hitting a post, a corner, whatever that may be. Having the ability to burst through the line up into the levels, and then, of course, move your body as fluent and easy and track the football. I mean, you look at Kelce, he does that really well. You watch him get off the line of scrimmage, man, and he's got some blazers outside of him. He's always in a position where, his breaks and cuts are always smooth and he always has separation. Sometimes when you watch teams, and maybe even seen with the Eagles, it always seems like it's a struggle to get a non-contested catch under the framework of the offense, where a guy like that is able to get out there and get separation and find spaces and do things where it becomes a little more easier for quarterback to get that kind of rapport and, that bang, bang kind of throw play that he wants to make within the framework of the system. So those are 2 elements I think that are key. I mean, and we'll just keep it on that side from a receiving standpoint, because that's what they're asking tight ends to do. So that explosion off the line of scrimmage is key, getting in. And if you are a fast guy, that's even just, more icing on the cake, because the fact that you're blowing off there, like I just talked about with Kyle Pitts, sometimes he doesn't do it as frequently, but he's still fast. And if you just maximize that, he can be even more dominating, and just controlling your body, being able to, with your movements, do it like a receiver does. And bigger guys can do it. Kelce's a bigger guy, 250. He can move his body, as fluent as a receiver does. And that's, game over there. That's kind of how it works. There is nobody that can cover that, period.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when we did that study of Travis Kelce a couple weeks ago, we noted that he had 84 catches or something like that were uncontested, nobody around him, and his ability to just get out of his stance, get from A to B as fast as possible before people could get on him. I got to think, to your point, plays a big part in that. Last question I've got for you. Just give us a scouting tip here. We're watching tight ends at the college level. It's draft season. Help us out. Everybody can see that, that Kyle Pitts is a dude, but outside, when you get past that, what's something that you're looking for at the position where it's all right, this guy's got it?
Well, number one, you're always looking for what's going on with the guy's heart, his intangibles. And I really do believe you can find those things on film. Number one, to me, when they're blocking, are they a player that attacks the defender, or are they a player that kind of chops and waits for the defender to kind of meet them? The guys that attack are the guys that can shoot their hands inside. Ultimately, are the guys that are going to be easier to formulate or get to the league and get them to be a player that can do it at a better level at the next level, because of the fact that they're not kind of a timid tight end trying to get at the tight ends. I know a lot of good big blocking tight ends that don't step towards the target because they feel like they can strong arm and stuff like that. But a lot of these guys aren't as big as maybe when I played at 275. They're coming in the league at 245, 250. They got to do it differently. So the quicker I get on the guy, the better chance I have to be successful. So number one is, are they someone that gets into the defender quickly and aggressively at the point of attack? Number two is, finish. Always trying to figure out what a makeup of a player is inside and what the game means to him when he's blocking. Is it a guy that finishes the block? When he gets into a guy and he's into him for about 3 seconds, does he want to finish drive through him and literally just do a little bit extra within the framework of the whistle of the play to finish the guy off? Those to me immediately tell you, and this is a lot of positions, especially linemen, when you're trying to figure out if this kid has, or he has that attitude and determination to be one of those guys that has that killer mindset. And that's going to be key, because if you don't have finishers, you're going to have guys that take off. You're either one or the other. There's no in between. You can't be a finisher, sometimes, and then other times just kind of do it. That's got to be your mentality. And that's when you get the great players, when you're trying to decipher tackles or guards or centers. And then of course, tight ends, where you're looking at maybe later round guys. That's going to be the determining factor on really how long. I think that tells you a little bit about how long these guys can actually play in the league, because that's the mentality they have. From a route running standpoint, again, we talked about a few of those things, but, guys that, when they catch, are they naturally catching the ball when the ball comes to them out of their breaks and getting up the field fast? Guys that can transition from the catch to getting up the football field will always maximize the yardage that they're looking for to get out of those guys as far as yak's concerned, yards after a catch. Guys that kind of, you'll have guys that catch balls and fall down sometimes in the spot they're in. You'll have guys that catch the ball, turn around and kind of wait and see what's going on. You want guys, if you watch Kelsey, of course, he does it the better than anybody. He comes out of his break, he catches it immediately. He's up the field. He is gone, and he's already got 2 yards more before a defender even comes over to him. So, now it's like, how much of this can you put together? And of course, you don't need all those variables and all those things for each tight end that you draft, because you're drafting for different needs. You may need a guy that can come in on a 3 tight end or 2 tight end set that can do a specific job for you. So those things to me are the biggest thing. Stats are all good. I've seen a lot of guys come in with a ton of stats, but maybe the system didn't dictated that a little more than what they may see in the NFL. And you got to make sure that, a lot of those things, do they finish after the catch? Are they trying to inflict pain on guys when they have the opportunity, lower their shoulder, be a dominant force? Do they have a little excitement to themselves when they're catching balls down the field and making plays? Are they a guy that just, kind of flips the ball and just gets up? I mean, there's positive and negatives to both. I mean, you want to have a guy that's fiery, but you don't want to have a hothead that, can lose his composure in the game as well. So, those are the small, short, quick things that I look at instantly that lead me to believe if this guy's going to be around the league or not. I really believe there's like the circles around a tree. And when you cut a tree open, you can see the age of it. That's kind of how I look at, that mentality and attitude in a finish. Do you have a finisher, or do you have a guy that's trying to test the waters a little bit? Normally those guys don't last a long time in the NFL. I can almost guarantee it. And that's something you can find in literally 3 games, in my opinion, if those guys are going to last or not. And I see it a lot in guys that, maybe aren't on the radar. I like finding, guys that okay, well, he's in the mix. He's supposed to get drafted. He's later guy. Perfect example. I'm trying to think about this kid, Sean Culkin, out of Missouri, a couple years ago. Played with Drew Lock, and he did a lot of this spread stuff. And when you watched him, you would think, okay, he's not going to be able to inline and this and that. Well, he came to Florida. He's from Indian Rocks Beach down here, and I trained him for about 2.5 months. And I just couldn't believe how good his footwork was, how strong he was, how good in pass protection he was. Every detail or every nuance that I wanted to teach him, and usually these guys don't understand it, getting their feet in the ground and how they block. This dude came in first day and just opened my eyes. So I knew right off the jump he was going to go somewhere and make it. And he did. He went undrafted. He went to the Chargers, ended up making the roster the first year and contributing as a 3rd guy. But again, he's still in the league. I think he's in Baltimore now. Working with them, with Nick Boyle, with that. But again, a guy that over-exceeded, because I saw those attributes and those traits. And I said, you know what? And I called teams about it. When he gets there and they see him, they're going to understand, there's something we can work with here. He's going to be able to help us. And, those are the things I like to look for too. So there's a lot of players out there. It's not an exact science, but in the pandemic, like we have now, trying to be a scout and those GMs out there that are looking, you don't get a lot of live coverage of these guys. You got to figure it out on the film. So, everybody always says, well, you can only see the tangible stuff. It's like, how do you know how the heart or his mindset? Like, you can tell those things on certain instances. Now, quarterback's tough because you're not engaging in someone. You can't see a finish. You can only see the product. But every other position, there's usually something, a tell that gives you a little bit about what's inside the guy. And ultimately, those are the guys that play long, in my opinion, whether a first round pick or, and you want to get those guys. If those guys are already a first round pick and they have that, then forget about it. They're going to get big money down the road. But those guys that are kind of like, first 3-4 rounds, or you're trying to figure out, is he worth taking over this guy who's super talented? I'd always take the guy that's close, but yet gives me more finish and gives me more of that attitude towards the end, because it just means a little more to him. And I know, like, when it comes to it in the fourth quarter, I can count on that guy. And ultimately, he usually extends his career and plays longer.
It does not shock me hearing you talk about that you like Nick Boyle when he was coming out of Delaware, because I feel like he checks a lot of those boxes.
Nick Boyle. He's in the best spot too. I can't imagine him not playing for like 15 years because, he just he's old school, but man, he is just teams tough to deal with. A guy like him, what the defenses are kind of made up of now.
Yep, no doubt. Well, Anthony, this has been awesome. Really appreciate you joining us here, giving a little bit of insight into the tight end position. Thanks for joining us on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Great stuff from Anthony. You can go follow on Twitter, just like I do, at Anthony_Becht. And while you're at it, I'm at EaglesXOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce here at Eagles Entertainment. And you know how much I appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on social media. But the best way to support the show is to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. I want to give a shout out today to someone who did exactly that. Frank R99 left a 5-star review saying, I really loved the episode with Brian Billick, and it made me wonder, what is the anatomy of a play call? From the moment the quarterback gets the play, what exactly happens? I see players communicating at the line and players shifting around, but what goes into the different adjustments, and how does it affect the current play from the initial call to what is executed on the field? Frank, that is a great question, and I will tell you what, I'm going to go and get a coach or a former quarterback. I'm going to get somebody here to take us through that entire process. So that's all you guys have to do. If you have something that you want found out, if I can't answer it for you right away in a very succinct fashion right here at the end of the show, then I'm going to go get somebody who can really talk through this and we can go through the entire process. So, Frank, that's exactly what we're going to do. I promise you, before we get through into the meat of the summer, I will have somebody on the show to go through this topic. It's a great one. I'm so glad you brought it up. If you guys out there have any questions that are like that, if you've ever wondered about a certain process that goes on in the middle of a game or in the middle of a drive, now's the time. Jump onto Apple Podcasts, leave us a question right there in the comment box, and we will get to it here on the show. Thanks so much to Frank and all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here with Eagles Entertainment. That being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the Duffy House, I am Fran Duffy. We'll talk to you later this week.
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.